They were told Americans would strip them, mock them, and parade them through the streets like animals. But when 847 German women stepped off the transport trains in rural Georgia, March 1945, the enemy broke them not with cruelty, but with something they hadn't felt in 6 months: hot water running down their backs. They expected death. Instead, they got soap. If you're interested in the untold stories of World War II, make sure to like this video and subscribe to our channel. These are the stories that changed history, one small act of humanity at a time. The Georgia morning air was thick and humid, nothing like the cold German winters these women had survived. They stumbled off the train cars in groups of 20, their gray Wehrmacht auxiliary uniforms hanging loose on bodies that had been slowly starving for months. Some were barely 20 years old. Others were in their 30s, veterans of the Women's Signals Corps, radio operators, nurses, administrative staff. All of them had one thing in common. They were terrified. The smell hit them first. Not the stench of unwashed bodies they had grown used to, but something clean, almost foreign. Laundry soap, fresh paint, and underneath it all, the unmistakable aroma of frying bacon. Real bacon, not the ersatz meat they had eaten during the war's final years. Some of the women turned to each other, confusion written across their exhausted faces. Greta, a former radio operator from Hamburg, clutched the small suitcase she had managed to keep through the chaos of Germany's collapse. Inside were a few photographs, a rosary her mother had given her, and a diary with water-stained pages. She was 23 but looked 40. Her blonde hair, once carefully braided every morning, now hung in matted clumps. Her skin was gray from months without sunlight, and her hands shook constantly. Next to her stood Anna, taller, harder, a woman who had operated anti-aircraft searchlights in Berlin. Anna had watched her city burn. She had pulled bodies from rubble. She had learned to shut down her emotions like turning off a light switch. But even she felt her stomach tighten as the American guards approached. The guards wore clean uniforms. That was the first shock. During the final months of the war, German officers had looked as ragged as their soldiers. These Americans looked like they had just stepped out of a recruitment poster. Their boots were polished, their rifles were clean. They didn't shout, they didn't raise their weapons. They simply gestured toward a line of buildings and said something in English that none of the women understood. A translator stepped forward, a middle-aged man with a German accent softened by years in America. His voice was neutral, almost gentle. You will be processed. You will be given medical examinations. You will be fed. Follow the guards and do not cause trouble. You are prisoners of war under the Geneva Convention. You will be treated accordingly. Geneva Convention. The EGU. Words meant nothing to most of them. They had been told stories during their training, stories designed to terrify. The Soviets, they were warned, would rape and kill them. The British would work them to death. And the Americans? The Americans, they were told, were soft but cruel. They would humiliate German women, force them into brothels, or simply let them starve while pretending to follow rules. None of those warnings prepared them for what happened next. The women were led into a large wooden building that smelled of fresh timber and disinfectant. Inside, American nurses moved efficiently through the space, setting up stations with clipboards, medical supplies, and stacks of clean clothing. Real nurses, Greta noticed. Not military police, not guards with guns. Nurses. They were told to line up. One by one, they approached a desk where an American woman with kind eyes asked questions through a translator. Name, age, unit, medical history. The questions were routine, bureaucratic, almost boring in their normality. Greta had expected interrogation, threats, demands for information. Instead, she got a clipboard and a number. Then came the medical examination. This was where the fear spiked again. Greta watched as women ahead of her disappeared behind canvas screens. She heard low voices, the sound of equipment being moved. When her turn came, her legs felt like water. Behind the screen, an American doctor waited. She was a woman, which was the first surprise. The second surprise was that she smiled. Not a cruel smile, not a mocking smile, but the tired, professional smile of someone who had examined hundreds of refugees and prisoners and simply wanted to help them survive. "Please remove your uniform," the translator said. Greta's hand shook as she unbuttoned her jacket. She had not been fully undressed in front of anyone in months. In the camps during the chaos of Germany's collapse, there had been no privacy, but there had also been no examinations. Now she stood in her threadbare undergarments, feeling exposed and vulnerable. The doctor checked her heart, her lungs, her eyes, her throat. She made notes on a chart. She asked about injuries, about illnesses. And then she did something Greta had not expected. She handed her a clean towel and pointed toward another door. "Through there," the translator explained. "Delousing and bathing. Everyone must be clean before being assigned to barracks." Delousing. The word sent ice through Greta's veins. She knew what that meant. During the war, she had heard whispers about camps in the east, about delousing showers that were not showers at all. Her breath came faster. Her vision narrowed. This was it. This was where the Americans would reveal their true nature. The door opened onto a long corridor. At the end was another door, and beyond it the sound of running water. Greta walked as if in a dream. Anna was ahead of her, moving with that same rigid control that never seemed to break. Behind them, more women filed in, each one silent, each one bracing for whatever horror awaited. They entered a large room with white tiled walls and wooden benches. In the center were shower stalls, real shower stalls with curtains for privacy, and on each bench sat a small basket containing a bar of soap, a towel, and a clean set of clothes. Greta stared at the soap. It was white, rectangular, and smelled faintly of flowers. Not the harsh lye soap they had used in Germany, but real soap. American soap. The kind of soap she remembered from before the war, when her mother would buy it from the pharmacy as a special treat. A female American soldier stood at the entrance, not looking at them, just waiting. The translator's voice echoed in the tiled space. "You have 20 minutes. The water is hot. There are private stalls. Clean yourselves thoroughly. Lice and dirt must be removed for your own health and the health of others. Leave your old clothes in the bins. New clothes are provided." No one moved. 20 seconds passed. 30. The women looked at each other, searching for some kind of trap, some hidden cruelty. And then Anna stepped forward, grabbed a bar of soap, and walked to the nearest shower stall. The sound of water starting was like a gunshot in the silence. Greta moved next. Her hands trembled as she picked up the soap. It was heavy in her palm, real and solid. She walked to a stall, pulled the curtain closed, and stood under the shower head. For a moment, she just stood there, unable to move, unable to process what was happening. Then she turned the handle. Hot water poured over her head, and Greta gasped. It was actually hot. Not lukewarm, not cold with occasional warm spurts, but genuinely hot water that steamed in the cool air. It ran through her matted hair, down her filthy skin, washing away months of grime and fear and exhaustion. She began to cry. Not loud sobs, but quiet tears that mixed with the water and disappeared down the drain. She lathered the soap in her hands and started washing her hair, her face, her arms. The soap foamed easily, nothing like the harsh bars they had used during the war. It cleaned without burning, without leaving her skin raw. Around her, other women were having the same experience. She heard soft laughter from one stall, someone unable to believe what was happening. She heard crying from another. She heard Anna's voice, sharp and angry, as if furious that the enemy could provide something so simple, so human. "It's not fair," Anna said through the curtain, her voice cracking. "It's not fair that they have this and we have nothing." When the 20 minutes ended, Greta emerged from the stall feeling like a different person. Her skin was pink and clean. Her hair, though still wet and tangled, felt lighter without the weight of dirt and lice. She dried herself with the towel, rough cotton that absorbed the water efficiently, and then dressed in the clean clothes that had been provided. Gray cotton work pants, a simple white shirt, underwear that was new, not scavenged or worn by someone else first, socks without holes. The clothes fit well enough, clearly mass-produced for prisoners, but they were clean and whole and warm. When all the women had finished, they were led out of the bathhouse and toward the mess hall. They walked in silence, each one trying to process what had just happened. They had expected humiliation. They had received dignity. They had expected degradation. They had received hot water and soap. The contradiction was unbearable. The mess hall was a long wooden building with windows that let in the Georgia sunlight. Long tables stretched the length of the room, and at one end a serving line steamed with the smell of real food. Not soup made from vegetable scraps, not bread made from sawdust. Real food. The women were directed to join the line. American soldiers, both men and women, moved through the mess hall, eating their own meals, paying little attention to the German prisoners except to nod or step aside. There was no segregation between prisoner meals and soldier meals. Everyone ate the same food. Greta picked up a tray, a real metal tray with sections for different foods. A cook, an older black man with kind eyes and massive forearms, spooned food onto her tray without comment. Scrambled eggs, bacon, toast with butter, a cup of coffee, a small bowl of oatmeal, an orange. Greta stared at the tray as if it were a bomb. This was more food than she had seen in a single meal in 2 years. More food than her family back in Hamburg had probably eaten in a week. She looked up at the cook, searching for mockery, for cruelty, for some sign that this was a trick. He just nodded toward the tables. "Go on, miss. Find a seat." She sat at a table with Anna and a dozen other women. They all held their trays with the same disbelieving expression. The eggs steamed gently. The bacon glistened with fat. The coffee smelled rich and dark. No one ate. They just stared. 30 seconds passed, a minute, and then a young woman from Munich, a girl of maybe 19, picked up her fork with shaking hands and took a bite of scrambled eggs. Her eyes widened. She took another bite, and then she began to cry, tears rolling down her clean cheeks as she chewed. That broke the spell. Greta picked up her fork and tasted the eggs. They were fluffy and seasoned with salt and pepper. Real eggs, not powdered, not stretched with flour and water. She took a bite of bacon and the flavor exploded in her mouth, rich and smoky and impossibly good. She picked up the toast and bit into it, butter melting on her tongue. Around her, women ate in silence, tears streaming down their faces. Some ate slowly, savoring every bite. Others ate quickly as if afraid the food would be taken away. Anna ate mechanically, her face hard, but Greta saw her hands shaking as she brought the fork to her mouth. "This is wrong," Anna whispered. "This is wrong. They shouldn't be feeding us like this." "Why?" Greta asked, her voice thick. "Why is it wrong?" "Because they're the enemy. Because we fought them. Because our brothers died fighting them. Because—" Anna stopped, unable to finish. Because it made everything they had been told a lie. An American guard walked past their table, a woman not much older than Greta. She glanced at their trays, saw that the coffee cups were empty, and gestured to a large urn at the end of the room. "More coffee over there if you want it. Just help yourself." She said it in English, but the gesture was clear. Help yourself. As if they were guests. As if they had not been enemies just weeks ago. As if they deserved comfort and courtesy and hot coffee whenever they wanted it. Greta peeled the orange slowly, the citrus smell almost overwhelming after months without fresh fruit. The orange was sweet and cold and perfect. She ate it section by section, making it last. And when she finished, she felt something she had not felt in months. Full. Actually full. But the fullness in her stomach could not fill the emptiness of confusion in her mind. After the meal, the women were marched to their barracks. The buildings were simple wooden structures painted white, with screened windows and solid roofs. Inside, rows of bunk beds lined the walls, each bed made up with sheets, a blanket, and a pillow. Not straw mattresses on the floor. Not pallets shared by 3 women. Real beds. Greta was assigned a lower bunk near a window. She sat on the edge of the mattress and pressed her hand against it. It was firm but not hard, filled with actual padding, not just canvas stretched over boards. She lay back slowly, testing its reality, and stared at the wooden ceiling. At the foot of each bed was a small wooden locker. The guards explained through the translator that personal items could be stored there. Anything that did not violate security rules was permitted. Letters, photographs, books, small personal effects. They would not be confiscated. They would not be searched unless there was reasonable suspicion. Greta opened her locker and carefully placed her suitcase inside. She took out her diary and held it for a moment, then tucked it under her pillow. In the camps during Germany's collapse, such items had been stolen or destroyed. Here the Americans told her she could keep it. A small pot-bellied stove sat in the center of the barracks, already stacked with wood. "For cold nights," the translator explained, "someone will show you how to operate it. You will also receive additional blankets if needed." It was March in Georgia. The nights were cool, but not cold. Yet the Americans planned for the possibility that these German women might be cold at night. They provided heating. They provided extra blankets. They treated their comfort as something that mattered. That evening, after the guards had left and the lights were dimmed, the women lay in their bunks and talked in whispers. Some discussed their families, wondering what had happened to them in the ruins of Germany. Others talked about the future, whether they would ever go home, what would become of them. But most of them talked about the bath and the food. "Hot water," someone whispered in the dark. "They gave us hot water. And soap. Real soap. The bacon was real. I could taste it. It wasn't ersatz. It was real." Greta said nothing. She lay with her hand pressed against her clean skin, feeling the softness that the soap had created, and tried to reconcile what she had been told with what she had experienced. They were the enemy. They had bombed German cities. They had killed German soldiers. And yet they gave her hot water and soap. She pulled out her diary and wrote by the light filtering through the window. March 12th, 1945. "We have arrived in America. I do not understand this place. The enemy treats us better than our own country did in the final months. I am clean for the first time in 6 months. I am fed. I have a bed. I should feel relief, but all I feel is confusion and shame. What kind of enemy shows kindness?" She closed the diary and tucked it under her pillow. Outside, crickets sang in the Georgia night. The sound was so peaceful, so normal, so unlike the air raid sirens and explosions that had been the soundtrack of her life for years. She fell asleep to that sound, clean and fed and more confused than she had ever been. The days settled into a rhythm. Each morning at 6, a bell rang to wake them. Not a harsh alarm, just a simple bell. The women dressed in their work clothes and made their way to the mess hall for breakfast. Oatmeal, toast, sometimes eggs, always coffee. Then they were assigned to work details. The work was not hard. Some women were sent to the camp laundry, washing uniforms and linens. Others worked in the kitchens, peeling vegetables and washing dishes. A few were assigned to light maintenance tasks, sweeping floors or tending to the small gardens around the camp. They were paid in camp scrip, a kind of internal currency that could be used at the canteen. The canteen was another shock. It was a small building near the center of the camp, stocked with items that seemed impossibly luxurious. Chocolate bars, cigarettes, toothpaste, combs, writing paper, stamps for letters, small luxuries that made life bearable. Greta saved her script for a week and then bought a Hershey bar. She held it in her hands for a long time before unwrapping it, staring at the brown paper and silver foil, reading the English words she could not understand. When she finally bit into it, the chocolate was sweet and creamy and perfect. She ate it slowly, making it last, and cried because the taste reminded her of childhood Christmases before the war. Anna bought cigarettes. She did not smoke much, just one after dinner each night, standing outside the barracks and staring at the darkening sky. Greta asked her once why she bothered, since she had never been a heavy smoker. Anna took a long drag and exhaled slowly. "Because I can," she said. "Because the enemy gives us money to buy cigarettes. Because everything I was told is a lie, and I need something to do with my hands." Meals continued to be generous. Lunch was usually sandwiches or soup with bread. Dinner was the largest meal, often including meat, potatoes, vegetables, and sometimes dessert. The women began to notice changes in their bodies. Their skin looked healthier. Their hair regained its shine. They had energy they had not felt in years. Some of the women gained weight. Not much, but enough to fill out their faces, to remove the hollow look of starvation. They looked in the small mirrors the camp provided and barely recognized themselves. They looked alive again. But every improvement came with a cost, because every bit of health they gained, every meal they ate, every bar of soap they used, reminded them of what they had left behind. The letters started arriving in late March. The Red Cross had managed to establish some contact between prisoners of war and their families, though the system was slow and unreliable. Many letters never arrived. Some took months. But when they did come, they carried news that broke hearts more effectively than any cruelty the Americans could have devised. Greta's first letter from her mother arrived on a Tuesday. She recognized the handwriting on the envelope, and her hands shook as she opened it. The letter was short, written in pencil on paper that looked like it had been torn from a school notebook. "My dearest Greta, we received news that you are alive and in America. Thank God. Hamburg is gone. Our neighborhood is rubble. We live in what remains of the cellar. Your father tries to find work, but there is no work. There is barely any food. We eat soup made from potato peels and whatever we can scavenge. Your brother has not been heard from since February. We pray he is alive. The British give us ration cards, but the rations are so small. If you can, please send anything. Even a little food would help. We are so hungry, Greta. Your loving mother." Greta read the letter 3 times and then carefully folded it and placed it under her pillow next to her diary. That evening she could not eat dinner. She sat in the mess hall, staring at her tray of pot roast, mashed potatoes, green beans, and bread, and felt physically sick. Her family was eating potato peel soup. She was eating pot roast. Anna received a letter from her sister in Berlin. The news was even worse. Their parents were dead, killed in an air raid. Their brother was missing, probably dead. The apartment was destroyed. Anna's sister was living in a refugee camp, surviving on bread and water, waiting for permission to travel west. Anna read the letter once and then burned it in the pot-bellied stove. She did not cry. She just watched the paper turn to ash and then went to her bunk and lay there, staring at the ceiling until morning. All over the camp, similar scenes played out. Women received letters telling them about destroyed cities, dead relatives, starving children, and lives reduced to survival, and every woman who received such a letter had to reconcile it with the reality of their own situation. They were prisoners of war, and yet they lived better than their own families. One evening, a group of women gathered outside their barracks, reading their letters aloud to each other. It became a ritual, a way of sharing the burden of guilt. Each letter was a knife, cutting deeper into the fabric of everything they had believed. "My children ask for bread," one woman read, her voice breaking. "I have nothing to give them." "My husband is in a British POW camp," another woman read. "He is sick. They do not have medicine. We burn furniture to stay warm. There is no coal. The Russians took everything. We have nothing left." After each reading, silence fell. What could they say? What comfort could they offer? They lived in heated barracks with beds and blankets. They ate 3 meals a day. They had soap and hot water. Their families had rubble and hunger and despair. The contradiction gnawed at them. It was not cruelty that broke these women, but kindness. It was not punishment that made them question everything, but mercy. And as the weeks passed, the weight of that mercy became almost unbearable. In late April, some of the women were selected for work details outside the main camp. They were taken by truck to nearby farms to help with planting, or to small towns to assist with various labor projects. Always under guard, always supervised, but allowed to see the world beyond the wire. Greta was part of a group sent to help at a local cannery. They rode in the back of a truck through rural Georgia, watching the landscape pass by. Small farms with painted houses, children playing in yards, cars parked in driveways, Everything was intact. Everything was normal. There were no bomb craters, no burned buildings, no rubble. The cannery was a large building on the edge of a small town. The women were assigned to sorting and packing vegetables, working alongside American women who chatted and laughed and occasionally offered them pieces of hard candy. The work was not hard, just repetitive, and it gave Greta time to observe. During lunch break, they were given sandwiches and cold lemonade and allowed to sit outside in the shade. Across the street was a grocery store. Through its windows, Greta could see shelves stocked with goods. Not ration cards and empty shelves like in Germany, but actual goods. Cans of food, bags of flour, fresh produce. A young boy came out of the store carrying an ice cream cone. He licked it casually, completely unaware of how impossible such a thing seemed to Greta. Ice cream, in the middle of a war. She had not seen ice cream in Germany since 1942. Anna sat next to her, eating her sandwich in silence. Finally, she spoke. This is what we were fighting. Not soldiers, not armies. This. She gestured at the Aksu town, the store, the boy with his ice cream. They have so much that they do not even notice it, and we have nothing. On another work detail, they passed through a larger town. Movie theaters advertised the latest films. Restaurants were open for business. People walked down the sidewalks wearing clean clothes, carrying shopping bags, going about their lives as if there was no war at all. Here in America, the war was something happening far away, something that did not touch daily life. In Germany, the war had touched everything. Every family had lost someone. Every city bore scars. Every day was a struggle to survive. The contrast was staggering, almost incomprehensible. That night back in the barracks, the women talked about what they had seen. Some were angry. How dare the Americans live in such comfort while Germany burned? Others were simply stunned. They had been told America was weak, soft, unprepared for war. Instead, they found a nation so wealthy, so powerful, that the war barely touched it. We never stood a chance, one woman said quietly. We never stood a chance against this. It was a bitter truth, but a truth nonetheless. Not all the guards were friendly. Some were cold, professional, keeping their distance. A few were openly hostile, having lost brothers or friends in Europe. But some were kind in small ways that made everything harder. There was a young guard named Sarah, barely 21, who worked the evening shift at the women's barracks. She was from Tennessee, and she had a soft accent that reminded Greta of singing. Sarah would sometimes stop and chat with the women, trying to bridge the language barrier with gestures and simple English words. One evening, Greta was sitting outside the barracks, writing in her diary when Sarah approached. She held out a piece of paper, folded carefully. "For you," she said, smiling. Greta unfolded it and found a simple drawing of a flower with the English words, "You are brave," written underneath. Greta looked up, confused. Brave? She was a prisoner. She had surrendered. She had failed her country. How could she be brave? Sarah seemed to sense her confusion. She gestured to the barracks, to the other women, and said something in English that Greta did not understand, but the tone was clear. Kindness, encouragement, a simple human gesture that said, "I see you. You matter." Greta carefully folded the paper and tucked it into her diary. That night she cried for the first time since arriving in America. Not from sadness, but from the sheer overwhelming weight of being treated with dignity by someone who had every reason to hate her. Another guard, an older man named Lieutenant Cooper, sometimes brought his guitar to the camp in the evenings. He would sit outside the mess hall and play American folk songs. The women would gather at a respectful distance, listening to the music. They did not understand the words, but music needed no translation. One evening he gestured for them to come. Closer. Through the translator, he asked if any of them knew German songs. A few women nodded. He smiled and said, "Sing." Hesitantly, one woman began to sing a traditional German folk song, a song about home and family. Others joined in, their voices soft at first, then growing stronger. Lieutenant Cooper listened, nodding along to the rhythm even though he could not understand the words. When they finished, he applauded. "Beautiful," he said in English, and somehow everyone understood. These moments were rare, but they accumulated. A guard who brought extra coffee during a cold morning, a nurse who took extra time to explain medical treatments, a cook who slipped an extra piece of fruit onto a tray. Small acts of kindness that chipped away at the walls of hatred and fear. Memory collided with reality. Everything they had been taught told them that Americans were cruel, that the enemy deserved no mercy, that captivity would be a nightmare. Everything they experienced told them something different. The irony was unbearable. By May, the war in Europe was over. Germany had surrendered unconditionally. The news reached the camp through American newspapers that were translated and posted on bulletin boards. The women gathered to read the headlines, to see photographs of Berlin in ruins, of German soldiers surrendering by the thousands, of Hitler dead by his own hand. Some women refused to believe it. The Reich could not be defeated. It was impossible. They clung to denial like a life raft, unable to accept that everything they had sacrificed for had ended in complete failure. Others felt relief. The war was over. No more bombing. No more death. Maybe now their families could begin to rebuild. But for many, the end of the war brought a deeper crisis. If Germany had lost, if everything they had been told was a lie, then what had it all been for? What had been the point of the suffering, the sacrifice, the years of war? Greta sat in the barracks that evening, holding her diary, unable to write. The question swirled in her mind like a storm. She had believed in her country. She had believed in the cause, however vaguely she understood it. She had believed that Germany was fighting for survival against enemies who wanted to destroy them. But those enemies had given her hot water and soap. They had fed her better than her own government had. They had treated her with more dignity than she had experienced in the final chaotic months of the Reich. How could both things be true? How could the enemy be both the destroyers of Germany and the providers of mercy? Anna struggled differently. She had always been practical, focused on survival rather than ideology. But even she could not ignore the contradictions. One evening she and Greta sat outside the barracks, watching the sun set over the Georgia pines. "I hate them," Anna said suddenly. "I hate them for being kind." Greta looked at her, surprised. "Why?" "Because if they were cruel, I could hate them. Cleanly. I could hold on to my anger. But this?" She gestured at the camp, at the barracks, at the mess hall in the distance. "This makes me question everything. Every choice I made. Every belief I held. It would be easier if they hurt us." "Maybe," Greta said slowly. "Maybe that's the point. Maybe mercy is stronger than cruelty." Anna said nothing, but Greta saw tears on her cheeks, glinting in the fading light. The barracks became a space for difficult conversations. Late at night, when the lights were dim and the guards were distant, the women talked about things they had never dared discuss before. About the war, about the Reich, about what they had believed and what they now knew. Some women still defended Hitler, still believed that Germany had been right. These women grew quieter as the weeks passed, isolated by their unwillingness to face reality. Others were openly critical, saying things that would have gotten them arrested in Germany just months before. "We were lied to," one woman said. "About everything. They told us the enemy was evil," another added. "But look how they treat us. Look how they treat everyone. The black soldiers eat at the same tables as the white soldiers. Women serve as guards and nurses. They have rules, and they follow them. That's not evil. That's civilization." "My brother died believing in the Reich," a young woman from Dresden said, her voice angry. "He died for nothing. For lies." These conversations were painful, sometimes angry, always raw, but they were necessary. The women were doing something that most Germans would not be able to do for years, confronting the truth about what they had supported, what they had believed, and what it had cost. Greta found herself in the middle. She could see both sides. She understood the women who still clung to the old beliefs, because letting go meant accepting that everything had been meaningless. But she also understood the women who were angry, who felt betrayed, who wanted answers. One night she wrote in her diary, "If the enemy values our lives, why do we not? Why did our own government treat us as expendable while the Americans treat us as human? What does that say about us? What does that say about them?" She had no answers, only questions. In June, the camp administration began offering educational programs. English classes were available for those who wanted to learn. There were also lectures on American government, American history, and the principles of democracy. Attendance was voluntary. No one was forced to participate. Greta signed up for English classes. She told herself it was practical, that knowing English would help her survive. But deep down, she was curious. She wanted to understand these people who had shown her such unexpected kindness. The teacher was a middle-aged woman named Mrs. Patterson, a civilian volunteer from the nearby town. She was patient and kind, treating the German women like students rather than prisoners. She taught them basic phrases, helped them with pronunciation, and always encouraged them to ask questions. One day, Mrs. Patterson brought pictures of her own sons. Both were serving in Europe. She showed the pictures to the class and explained through gestures and simple words that she worried about them every day, that she prayed they would come home safely. Greta stared at the photographs. These boys, young men really, might have fought against German soldiers, might have bombed German cities. And yet here was their mother, treating German prisoners with kindness and patience, teaching them English even though her own sons were still in danger. After class, Greta approached Mrs. Patterson. In broken English, she asked, "Why you kind? We enemy." Mrs. Patterson smiled sadly. "You're not my enemy, dear. You're just a girl far from home. We're all God's children, no matter which side we were on." That simple statement broke something inside Greta. She returned to the barracks and cried for an hour, unable to explain to anyone why. How could she explain that an enemy had just treated her with more Christian charity than she had ever experienced in her own supposedly Christian nation? The camp also showed films on Saturday nights. American movies, usually light comedies or musicals, subtitled in German. The women gathered in the rec hall, sitting on benches, eating popcorn provided by the camp, and watching stories about American life. The movies showed a world of abundance, opportunity, and freedom that seemed almost fantasy. But the women had seen enough of America to know it was not entirely fantasy. This world existed. These people lived like this, and Germany had tried to fight them. The most dangerous weapon was not bombs or bullets. It was dignity. It was mercy. It was showing enemy prisoners that there was another way to live, another way to organize society, another set of values that did not require cruelty and domination. Perhaps captivity revealed more truth than freedom. In Germany, they had been told what to think, what to believe, what to value. Here, as prisoners, they were being shown an alternative simply by being treated as human beings. Kindness cuts deeper than cruelty. The turning point came on a July afternoon. Greta was working in the camp laundry, feeding sheets through the industrial washing machines, when she caught sight of her reflection in a metal surface. She stopped, staring at herself. Her face had filled out. Her skin was clear and healthy. Her hair, which she had learned to braid again, shone in the afternoon light. She looked like herself again. Not the starving, terrified creature who had arrived in March, but the young woman she had been before the war destroyed everything. The Americans had done that. The enemy had given her back her humanity. She set down the sheet she was holding and walked outside, needing air, needing space to think. She found a bench near the camp's small garden and sat down, hands shaking. Anna found her there 20 minutes later. She sat down without speaking, and for a long time they just sat together in the Georgia heat. Finally, Greta spoke. "I can't go back to who I was." "No," Anna agreed. "None of us can. They've changed us. Not with force, not with propaganda, just by treating us like we matter." Anna nodded. "I used to think strength meant being hard, being willing to do whatever it takes. But maybe real strength is being kind when you have every reason not to be." They sat in silence watching American guards walk past, watching the sun filter through the Georgia pines. And Greta realized that she had crossed a line she could never uncross. She had seen the enemy's humanity, and in seeing it, she had to recognize her own complicity in a system that had denied such humanity to others. The pain of transformation was physical, a weight in her chest that never fully lifted, but it was also necessary. Because the alternative was to cling to lies, to retreat into denial, to refuse to see what was right in front of her. That evening she wrote in her diary, "Today I looked in a mirror and saw a stranger. Someone healthy, fed, clean. The enemy did this. They gave me back my life, and in doing so they destroyed every certainty I had. I don't know who I am anymore, but I know I can never be who I was." In August, rumors began circulating about repatriation. Germany was divided into zones of occupation. Prisoners of war would be sent back gradually, processed through camps in Europe, and eventually released to return to their families. The women should have been overjoyed. They were going home. But many felt dread. Greta lay awake at night, thinking about what awaited her in Hamburg. Rubble, starvation, her family living in a cellar, and she would return to them healthy, well-fed, carrying the guilt of having lived comfortably while they suffered. How could she explain it to them? How could she tell her mother that the enemy had fed her bacon and eggs while her family ate potato peel soup? How could she tell her father that she had slept in a bed with clean sheets while they huddled in ruins? Some women expressed what others only thought. They were afraid to leave, afraid to give up the security, the food, the basic dignity they had found in captivity. It was shameful to admit, treasonous even, but it was true. "I don't want to go back," one woman whispered in the dark of the barracks. "Does that make me a traitor?" No one answered because they all felt the same way. The truth they carried was too heavy, too complex, too painful. They knew things most Germans would not know for years. They knew that the enemy was not a monster. They knew that another way of life was possible. They knew that their own government had failed them more completely than any foreign power ever could. And they knew that returning to Germany meant returning to a nation that was not ready to hear such truths. The repatriation orders came in September. Lists were posted. Women gathered around the bulletin boards, searching for their names, their hearts pounding. Greta's name was on the first transport. She would leave in 2 weeks. The final days passed in a blur. The women prepared for departure, packing the few possessions they had accumulated. Some wrote letters to guards who had been kind, thanking them in broken English. Others simply tried to memorize everything, knowing they would need these memories in the hard times ahead. On her last day, Greta stood in the bathhouse one final time. She turned on the shower and stood under the hot water, crying silently, knowing this might be the last hot shower she would have for years. She used the soap carefully, making it last, and when she emerged, she felt like she was leaving a sanctuary. The journey back to Europe was long and uncomfortable. They traveled by ship, then by train, processed through various camps and checkpoints. The treatment was still relatively fair, still followed the rules, but it lacked the strange gentleness of the American camp. When Greta finally reached Hamburg in late October 1945, she almost did not recognize it. The city was a moonscape of ruins. Entire neighborhoods had been erased. The smell of decay and smoke still lingered in the air. People moved through the rubble like ghosts, thin and gray and hopeless. She found her family in the cellar of what had once been their apartment building. Her mother looked 20 years older. Her father had lost so much weight that his clothes hung on him like rags. They embraced her, crying, thanking God she was alive. Her mother pulled back and looked at her face. "You look so healthy," she said, and there was wonder in her voice, but also something else. Confusion. Maybe even resentment. Greta said nothing. What could she say? The guilt was overwhelming. That night they gave her a bowl of thin soup and a piece of bread. It was all they had. She ate it slowly, remembering the meals in Georgia, the bacon and eggs, the fresh fruit, the hot coffee. The contrast was devastating. Her father asked her about the camp, about how she had been treated. She told him the truth. He listened in silence, his face unreadable. When she finished, he simply nodded. "They were better to you than we were to ourselves," he said quietly. "That's something we will have to live with." Years passed. Germany rebuilt, slowly and painfully. Greta married, had children, lived a quiet life. But she never forgot those months in Georgia. She never forgot the hot water, the soap, the kindness of strangers who had every reason to hate her. In the 1960s, when her daughter was old enough to ask questions about the war, Greta told her the story. Not the propaganda version she had been taught, but the truth. She told her about arriving in America terrified and starving, and being given hot water and soap instead of cruelty. Her daughter asked, "Why did they do that? Why were they kind to you?" Greta thought for a long time before answering. Because they believed in something we had forgotten. They believed that even enemies are human beings, that there are rules that should never be broken, no matter how angry you are, no matter how much you've lost. They showed us mercy, and that mercy was more powerful than any weapon. "Was it hard?" her daughter asked. "To accept kindness from the enemy?" "Harder than you could imagine," Greta said. "Cruelty would have been easier to carry. Hatred is simple. But kindness forces you to see the person in front of you. It forces you to question everything you believed, and that's terrifying." She kept her diary all her life, that water-stained notebook with its penciled entries. She read it sometimes, late at night, remembering the girl she had been and the woman she had become. The diary ended with a single entry, written years after the war. "I thought captivity would break me. I thought the enemy would destroy what little I had left. But they gave me something I had lost, the belief that humanity can survive even in the darkest times. They gave me hot water and soap, and in doing so, they gave me back my soul." And so the hot water became more than a shower. The soap became more than a cleaning agent. They became proof that even in war, even between enemies, mercy is possible. For those 847 German women, the smell of that floral soap became a symbol of contradiction but also of survival. It reminded them that even enemies can show kindness, and that sometimes kindness is the most powerful force of all. As Greta told her grandchildren many years later, on a summer evening much like those Georgia nights, "The Americans gave us hot water when we expected death. They fed us when we expected to starve. They treated us like human beings when we expected to be treated like animals. And in doing so, they taught us that the measure of a nation is not how it treats its friends, but how it treats its enemies." That is the story worth remembering. Not just the battles and the politics, but the small acts of mercy that change lives and challenge beliefs. The story of women who expected cruelty and received soap, who expected death and received dinner, who expected to lose their humanity and instead had it restored by the very people they had been taught to hate. If you found this story meaningful, please like this video and subscribe to our channel for more untold stories from World War II. These stories, though buried in time, still speak to us today. They remind us that even in the darkest chapters of history, humanity can prevail, that mercy matters, that how we treat our enemies defines us more than how we treat our friends. Thank you for watching, and remember, the most powerful weapon is not always the one that destroys. Sometimes it's the one that heals.